What's going on, everybody? It's time to get out the wide angle lenses. Today we are talking about wide angle compositions, compositional choices, and the consequences that come along with those choices. Alright guys, we couldn't be in a better spot to have this type of tutorial. We are in Death Valley and we've come down to the flats, and I've been trying to find this spot for the last 3 years. I've been coming here. I finally found it. We have these salt circles, these salt patterns that are surrounded by these darker rings that are just absolutely fascinating. And I wanted to talk about one of the most common pieces of advice that I hear and that I've given for people when they use a wide angle lens. You know, the wide angle lens, one of the big advantages is the perspective distortion. So you get up really close to an element in your foreground, and whether it's like a rock or a waterfall, and then in the background you have a mountain or something like that, and a lot of times what you're told is to get down low. A lot of times in the mid-ground, there's not a lot of interest, right? You have this really strong foreground, you have a background element that's really nice, that's going to keep the viewer's eye, but in the mid-ground sometimes there's just not a lot of interest. So when you move down with your camera, your foreground element and your background element, they compress, right? So you eliminate a lot of this mid-ground, and that's a really great technique, but in this case, it's not the best idea. So what I'm looking at here is some salt circles that are going off into the distance, right? They go off into infinity. But if you guys watch, as I get down low, that midground disappears. And in this case, you don't want that. What you're looking at here is repeating patterns and something called size progression, right? So you have a big foreground element, you have a nice salt circle that I found that captures the eye, right? It's got an interesting shape to it. I picked it out intentionally because I think that's going to grab the viewer's eye. It's like that opening paragraph in a book that captures the reader's attention. So I've shot that, or I put that in the foreground, but I'm making sure that I'm shooting at eye level, which isn't always the best case. A lot of times you're being told not to shoot at eye level because that's what we see every day. It can get boring, it can make the photo not as interesting. But in this case, this is exactly what you want to do. You want to have a strong foreground element, but you're high enough so that midground doesn't disappear. So these repeating patterns and this size progression, right, as the circles get smaller as they get off in the distance, but they don't disappear until the very, very, very background. So the higher you can get, the better. I mean, I have a taller tripod, I can probably get up to here. So make sure every choice is done on purpose. So if you decide you want to go low, that midground is going to disappear. And as long as you know that, that's the consequence for making that choice. Being up high like this, right, you're getting up a little bit higher, I'm not so close to that foreground element, you're going to lose a little bit of that perspective distortion. That's the consequence of the decision I'm making here. And one more thing is the orientation. So if I want to go landscape, that's gonna make the sides, right? The sides are gonna be elongated, not necessarily the bottom so much. It still does, it still gets distorted a little bit, but if I was to turn this portrait orientation and get up closer, I could walk up another foot or foot and a half, plus my tripod, and then Dutch my camera down. I'll get back some of that distortion, but as long as I'm up high, it's going to make that photo even more interesting. So you got to make sure that you're taking everything into consideration when you're setting up your image, right? You want to make sure that the height you're at really shows the elements in the scene, right? You don't want to get low and make something disappear that's interesting. You don't want to be too high if the midground isn't. So for this particular scene, I want to make sure that I am right at eye level. I want to make sure that I have that nice foreground element that captures that viewer, that very first opening paragraph. But then I want the viewer's eye to just continue on all the way to the background. I got some nice clouds in the sky. This is a very, very nice scene. That was an exciting sunset, color just in every direction. So stay tuned, guys. In the next section of this video, we're going to be hopefully visiting some mud cracks if they're still there. I'm not quite sure. A lot more walking to do. But again, we're going to be continuing to talk more about wide angle composition, choices, and consequences. Alright guys, in the second part of this video, I'm looking for mud cracks that have interesting shapes to them, and that's kind of the goal of this outing. And the second part of this video is to find a different scenario for you guys. So what I'm looking for is interesting designs and interesting lines in these mud cracks, a feature that sticks out to me. And so as I'm walking around, I find this design and this feature in these mud cracks and the way they're shaped that are interesting to me. And what's interesting about them is inside the cracks there are these mud chips. And so I had a decision to make on this, is if I got up high like this, that shape doesn't really have a lot of prominence. You know, I retain some of that mid-ground, you know, all the cracks in the mid-ground, but you can see when I get down low, the perspective distortion of the 16mm lens really brings out that shape, and it really puts the emphasis on those little chips in the mud cracks, you know, and it makes it something that I found interesting. It makes that the subject of the photo. You know, so I had this decision to make. Do I get up high and show the mid-ground and all the cracks in the mid-ground, or do I get down low and use that perspective distortion and really show these little mud chips inside the mud cracks, which I found unique? And that was my job as the artist and the photographer, is to, you know, be able to take the photo and make sure that the viewer, when they see it, they know what I found interesting. They're able to see what I see. You know, I'm able to use the perspective distortion to really bring out the feature that I like the most, and they're able to see that right away. You know, there's no question on, you know, what I found interesting in the photo is exactly what they see. So that was my decision. Get down low, use that perspective distortion, you know, focus stack, and put the emphasis on these lines in the mud cracks and then these mud chips. But one of the biggest things in all of these tips is, what is it that you see and how can you relay that to the viewer? You know, when they look at your photo, are they able to see what you see? That's the biggest thing. It's not about the subject, it's about the artist, right? When it comes to taking photos, a lot of people think it's about the photo, but it's not. It's about the photographer. It's about their eye and what they see. And so in this particular case, I want the viewer to see what I see. I want the viewer to be able to, you know, understand what I found interesting about the landscape. And in this case, it was the shape with the mud cracks and also these little mud chips that were in the foreground. You know, I really like that. So that's what I make sure in making this decision, you know, at the consequence of losing some of that mid-ground, I'm able to convey to the viewer exactly what I liked about this photo. But right now we're going to move on to another photo that I found. So as I'm walking around, I see this bush, and it's one of the only bushes that are out here in all these mud cracks, and it's literally right in the middle of them. So I set up my tripod and I got really low right next to the bush, trying to make that really prominent in the frame. But what I found is it wasn't all that impressive. I stood up and I started walking around, and I realized that when I got up high, these mud cracks all pointed towards that bush. So it almost looked like all of these, so the subject is the bush. That's what I found interesting. And all of these lines of these mud cracks from the mid-ground, the foreground, all lead to this bush. That's my subject. That's what I want the viewer to concentrate on. You know, I have nice color in the sky, and these mud cracks and all these features are beautiful, but I want that focus on that bush. That's what was unique to me. And if I get up high, all of these lines point. It's like a map. It looks like a map to the bush. You know, every line, it's like very abstract. It's very unique, and I really like that about this scene. So getting up high in this case really puts the emphasis on that bush and all of those mud cracks leading to that bush. So you can see now, these are the finished products. These are my edited photos, and you can see how there's two completely different moods, completely different subjects, all within a 30-foot area. Just by making these decisions on whether you want to get down low and up close, or whether you want to take a step back and get up high, it completely changes the look and feel of the photo. In both cases, it's very clear to the viewer what the photographer, myself, what I'm seeing. It's very clear and it's deliberate. Every decision that I made was deliberate in these photos, and that's the important thing I want you guys to take away, is make sure that your choices are deliberate. Everything you do, from where you're standing to the focal length you're using to your camera settings, make sure that it's clear to the viewer what you find interesting about this photo, or what you find interesting about your subject. All right guys, that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.